Hello, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Smith, and I'm the co-creator and producer here at the Resistance Bureau. I'm delighted to join not one, but two former guests on our show, Farida Nabourema and Alex Dukalski. We are here to discuss the ways in which authoritarian regimes use PR and lobby firms to varnish their images and make their worlds safe for dictatorship. Farida, as our audience will surely remember, is an award-winning human rights defender and the executive director of the Togolese Civil League, an NGO that promotes democracy and human rights in Togo through grassroots organizing, civic education, and public advocacy. Alex is an associate professor at the School of Politics and International Relations at University College Dublin. His 2021 book, which I have right here, Making the World Safe for Dictatorship, examines the tactics that authoritarian rulers use for image management to both secure and extend their rule. In many ways, this conversation is a follow-up to our previous show, Resisting the Whitewash, the role of PR and lobby firms in laundering authoritarianism, the full recording of which you can find on the Resistance Bureau website and on our YouTube page. So to kick things off, Alex, I'd love to start with you. And if you could, at the outset, sort of widen the scope for me and for our audience who are listening and set the table, so to speak. What is image management in the realm of international relations, and what are the primary mechanisms through which we see this manifest?
Sure. Well, thanks again for having me. It's great to be back. Yeah, so authoritarian image management is the basic insight is that authoritarian states care a lot about how foreign audiences perceive them. Okay, so you might think that's so strange. I mean, why, right? They don't respect democracy at home, so why do they care what foreigners think? Well, there are all kinds of reasons why an authoritarian state might care about how they're perceived abroad. They might want foreign investors to invest in their country. They might want to secure aid or favorable trade deals from a powerful country, a powerful foreign country. And so they have all these incentives to make themselves look good, basically. And so to do that, they do things like hire public relations firms, try to steer public conversations towards their preferred kind of frames and norms. And they go beyond that. And so that's all, we kind of know all that, but they go beyond that and they try to discredit opponents abroad. So, public relations firms will often, yeah, okay, of course, burnish the image of the dictator, so to speak, but they'll also try to discredit human rights groups or cast aspersions on their motivations or manipulate social media content or manipulate Wikipedia entries, for ordinary people going to look up a country's background. And so there are all these kinds of little insidious ways in which states try to manage and protect their preferred image. Another way is to lobby and manipulate elites, right? To try to get other foreign, opinion leaders to kind of tell that country's story really well. Right? In a recent research project with some co-authors at the University of Copenhagen and the Berlin Social Science Center, we scraped all of the contracts that authoritarian states agreed with public relations and lobbying houses in the United States between 1945 and this last year. And we found, that all kinds of states use these kinds of services, right? They help connect states to opinion leaders, policymakers, and publics in the United States to try to manage their image. So it's a really widespread phenomenon, and it covers lots of different facets of action.
Thank you so much for that, Alex. It's a really useful context. And I think, Farida, this is a really good spot to bring you in here because just last month, coincidentally, the military regime in Togo hired a Washington-based PR firm to do damage control after what many Togolese, including yourself and many of your colleagues, have labeled a constitutional coup. So what can you tell us about these latest developments, both inside Togo, politically and domestically, but also here in Washington? And what is your response to all of this?
Well, the reality is that when our government invests that much resources into polishing their image internationally, they have two objectives. They have further objectives than the ones that Alex has listed, which are obtaining more aid and securing trade deals and investment. I believe that one of the most important one is to actually send a message to the resistance community back home, especially the opposition and the activists and the people working extremely hard to expose their corruption, their poor governance, and their failures internally. It is to make it seem as if internationally they are very acclaimed, they are very accepted, and that the opposition will not get as much support internationally because they are seen as a positive and progressive regime and are highly regarded. So destroying the morals of their opponents is already one of those, because I have seen and noticed from conversation that I had with activists and politicians in Togo, them getting upset that the US government entities will be entertaining our officials or inviting them to attend some important events, or even awarding them for certain US-based institutions, which they actually use for national propaganda. So it is very important for them to create an image that internationally they have a lot of support, and the nationals cannot rely on the same support to try to weaken their regime. Beyond that, they do not only go towards public relations companies, and that we usually call aesthetically lobby firms. Recently, they are also investing a ton of money in getting the attention of celebrities and influencers, social media influencers from other nations. So they actually go around and identify people who are prominent within the youth audience internationally. Then they organize activities and events and invite them to the country to do a travel tour or a touristic show. And in that prospect, they actually showcase how the president of this nation is doing a fantastic job, and they make sure to only film the most beautiful aspects of town, from the fancy hotels to the couple of streets that are manageable and that are that seems to be clean and have good roads. And then they interview government officials who talk about how they are doing so well thanks to the openness of the head of state. So they try to manipulate international public opinion. Then when you see those videos going around on social media, coming from random influencers who are lifestyle influencers or social media influencers or athletes or musicians, then you don't see any political agenda behind it. Then people are like, oh, this country is really doing good. Then it becomes harder for the opposition and the dissidents to convince people that the country is not doing as beautifully as they think or as they see in those videos. Things are not that easy for the average citizens, and the infrastructures are not in place to even guarantee a decent quality of life for the average citizen. So the agenda goes both in terms of attracting resources and aid, but also ensuring that they weaken their dissidents and be able to counter the narrative which those dissidents are promoting, exposing their failures and their abuses.
Thank you so much, Farida, for that. So, hearing you talk, Alex, I wanted to come back to you really quickly, just, given what we've heard, some of these tactics about using social media influencers and celebrities. We've seen this across the African continent, in Equatorial Guinea, for example, which is a big spender on PR and lobbying here in Washington. We've seen it in the case of Uganda, in the last remaining kingdom in Africa, and Swaziland. This is seems to be pretty consistent and commonplace. Has this been the case for you as well in some of the other countries you've studied outside of the continent? And then secondly, I'd really love to get your thoughts on, why does this matter? Why does it matter for us to better understand the mechanisms and the lengths to which such regimes go to make their world safe for dictatorship? Why should we be concerned about all of this? Would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and Farida's comments there resonate with a lot of the research that's out there, and it was so interesting to hear some of those reflections. I think the idea of attracting and paying celebrities is a tried and true tactic kind of the world over, bringing pop stars to do concerts and that sort of thing. Saudi Arabia, of course, now is hosting, professional wrestling, which is just the strange discordant worlds coming together, right? And so this is really common, and I think there's an element of trying to normalize authoritarian rule and dictatorship, to say, hey, you can do the same things that you can do in a democracy. Look, you can watch your favorite wrestler or your favorite pop star, do their thing. How could things be so bad, right? And so I think there's that kind of logic. You know, one of the things that Farida said that I think is really resonant is this social media manipulation of conversation. You know, one of the things that authoritarian regimes do is they're fiercely protective of their sovereignty at home. You know, they don't want any criticism from foreigners. You know, how dare you foreigners tell us what to do, you know, so on and so forth. You know, we define our own human rights. But then they're very happy to exploit the openness of liberal democracies and you know, do all kinds of manipulation of messages, whether it be on social media or through celebrities or PR firms or lobbying or, you know, you name it, right? So there's a fundamental hypocrisy there of closing oneself off to criticism at home while using all the avenues and mechanisms that an open society affords in order to protect their own you know, their own hold on power. So I think really, you know, coming back full circle to your question, I think that's why it matters, because these kinds of tools really are impactful in some ways. So I think it's important to track however much we can these activities, even when it's really difficult, because hiring influencers and things, I mean, you know, the data is not great. So like a lot of the stuff is behind the scenes. So more transparency is always better so that at least we can track it and understand what's happening, you know, as analysts and academics.
Absolutely. I think that's spot on. And Farida, just to close out, we heard you talking about, you know, how, and Alex as well, how regimes often use a number of tactics to sort of boost and burnish their images abroad. But one of the more nefarious ways in which they go about this is undermining and attacking their critics, of course, often with the help of Western companies, PR and lobby firms. And I know that you and your family are, of course, no stranger to this. So I wanted to ask you sort of a personal question and ask how you've dealt with this, how you have navigated this harsh reality. And related to that, I know you're in Washington, D.C. this week, speaking to policymakers and leaders here. So what is your message to those with whom you're meeting with this week? Farida, I think you're on mute.
Apologies. So, thank you for your question, Jeff. I'll start by saying that there is there's not a single way of navigating the propaganda that these regimes deal with. Some of them are easier to debunk than others. For some of them, we just let them go because as activists, we have limited resources and time, and we can only address the most important things. In the past, where we had the government of Togo hire some prominent pop stars from the African continent and musicians and athletes to reclaim their image and do all those propaganda, I personally call them out. Not only calling them out, I personally reach out to them. And I remember the first time I did that was 2010. That was even way before social media became very popular. I called out on artists who the government hired to completely make a song promoting how well the Togolese are lucky to have a president like Fonya Singbe. And the song was based on lies. In fact, they say that C-sections was free in Togo, maternal care was free in Togo. When we have a country with one of the highest mortality rates for pregnant women in the world as a result of poverty and lack of health infrastructure. So calling them out is a way of doing that. And I did it not only with that artist, but many others in the future. We did it with a lot of several prominent figures. Whenever the government recruits them for such propaganda, we call them out, we reach out to their team and ask them to openly withdraw their statement. If they don't, then we actually call people to criticize them to a point where some of them are even afraid of returning to Togo because they face severe and very harsh attacks from the citizens after they did that. Now, when it comes to international lobby firms, then we are more limited because we have to be able to match that effort with advocacy, and it is not easy because it's more costly. It requires more structure and it requires more resources. So it is a very difficult process, but my first advice is to always find a way to call those out, use the same avenues that they use to be able to raise awareness on the issue. And thank you very much for giving us an opportunity on this platform to do that. Now, in regards to the last question, what is my message to policymakers? Is that they know better when it comes to being contacted by PR companies trying to get them to support aid or open up to certain partnership with authoritarian regimes. They know better than just trust whatever those PR are telling them about those countries doing well. They can always try to counter that information by looking for data right on the ground and speaking with civil society organizations and activist groups and movements from those countries. In the case of Togo, for example, the government also invested massively in creating fake civil society organizations that actually portray themselves as human rights organization, but their entire report shows how well the government is doing towards human rights. So it is also important to be able to find out which kind of organizations are trustworthy that you can get credible information from, and those are not lacking. You can always get those information very easily. And it is important for people to understand that at the end of the day, they are not doing justice to the citizens of those nations by falling to those beautiful words that those PR companies put out there promoting dictators. Because in the end, whenever they choose partnership with a dictator, they are putting interest over the well-being and over the rights and freedom of the citizens of those nations.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that, Farida. And I think you offer a really good and poignant reminder that activism can sometimes work. I'm reminded a decade ago now in 2014, where we were part of a campaign to get Erykah Badu to pull out of a concert scheduled in the Gambia when that country was being ruled by a ruthless dictator, Yahya Jammeh. She ultimately did. Or the recent case in 2021 where we were part of a campaign to get MTV actually to pull out of a scheduled event in Uganda. They were going to host the MTV Africa Music Awards in Kampala, and the regime there was using it as this huge, propaganda platform. And it was really embarrassing for them when MTV ultimately backed out. And Alex, you brought up the issue of Saudi Arabia. I know Nicki Minaj, for example, who has performed for a number of African dictators in Angola and elsewhere, actually pulled out of a scheduled concert in Saudi Arabia due to mounting criticism over her agreeing to do that. So I think it's a good reminder that making noise works sometimes, and activism does work. We just have to raise our voices and use those networks of solidarity that we have to really amplify the voices of activists on the ground who are really putting their lives on the line to advance change and to fight against repression and authoritarianism. So I'm glad that we ended on a bit of a hopeful note. So thank you so much, Farida and Alex, for joining us today, for sharing your expertise and insights, and for really helping us and our audience to better understand the image management industry, as well as educating us about a concrete example in Togo. So at the Resistance Bureau, we'll definitely continue to highlight these issues, which still too often go overlooked, and we certainly look forward to keeping in touch with the both of you going forward. So take good care in the meantime, and definitely keep up the great work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father.